Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today we're talking about all things harmony. To do that, we have two co-founders in the hot seat today. We have Stephen C. and Nick White to really explain what harmony stands for, what they're doing, and what they're going to do to revolutionize the blockchain space. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today.
Hey everyone, thanks Brad.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Thank you, Brad, for hosting. We're really excited.
Likewise, mate. Now, we've been hearing a lot about harmony, I suppose, in the academic sphere, but not a lot in the lay space, especially in crypto. Now's your time to shine. Let's get stuck into this. You say, guys, that you are an open consensus. You're permissionless by design, designed for 10 billion people, and you say that harmony is for one and all. So obviously there's some really great ideals in there, but we want to unpack this for the reality that is blockchain. Tell us exactly what you mean when you say that you are an open ledger designed to be permissionless and for the masses.
No, thank you for bringing our mission here. I think that's what it matters, right? To us, the last generation of technology is already able to impact tens of millions of people, 100 millions of people, mobile, if you get it right, like even a billion people possible. We do think that blockchain, day one, if you get it right, whether Bitcoin or Ethereum, anyone can use this in the world. That's the idea of 10 billion people, everyone. Right now, in the future, in about 20, 30 years, the world will stabilize to 10 billion people. That's why we get that idea of it's really for everyone right now in the future. The idea of open consensus is also what everyone talks about. Can we actually agree with each other so that we can create more transactions between each other to create wealth, or we agree to do something? That the part of agreement, do we have some way to collaborate, harmony of how we live together, how we create values together? And the open part is not for any particular company, but a platform that we come together to achieve.
Right. So, Nick, I want to talk to you. You're also an electrical engineer. You know, you're both very qualified. I've seen your resume, Stephen. It's ridiculous with regard to all the academic and even in the workplace. You've done a lot. But I want to talk about high throughput, low latency. I really want to go into the needs of the high transactions per second, because we hear that narrative constantly. You're no different. You're really pushing for this as part of your whole design. Tell us, Nick, why we really need to do this. Why do we need to scale?
So going back to the open consensus for 10 billion people, that 10 billion part is crucial for explaining why we need high throughput. Because in any network, right, the more people that are in it, the more valuable it becomes. So if we want to build the most valuable blockchain network, we need to plan for billions of people using it. And if billions of people are using that, even just for something as simple as payments, we're going to need high throughput. And all the other applications that we can build on top of that, decentralized exchanges or decentralized finance or even gaming, you name it, if we are going to be at the global scale, we're going to have millions, if not billions, of transactions every second on the platform.
Right.
So that's why the throughput is so crucial. We need to design for that end game at the very beginning.
So not just lip service is what you're saying, because we do hear that sort of feedback from the community that really it almost became too much for some of them, almost unpalatable, that there was these statements being made, thrown out of several million, if not tens of millions, and some even hundreds of millions, and that gets a little bit far-fetched. But what you're saying is there is an imperative for this kind of long-term scaling.
Absolutely. So if you think about why IPv6 come to age, right? If you think about why broadband or even DVD or Blu-ray come to age, right? People always ask, oh yeah, I just need a little bit faster internet, right? We just need the mobile phone to be a little bit faster to do anything. The enabling of the new technology is the following. Once you really bring in it 10 times, 100 times faster, it really opened up a new platform that we haven't thought before, right? Who knew that we can be streaming movies? Who knew that we can actually do mobile transactions everywhere in our life, right? Only when the technology is possible today, and you start from day one to make sure that you get that right, is making 10% improvement every year, will allow us to have a new platform for everyone.
Right. Well, gentlemen, let's talk about numbers for a moment. Let's talk specifics of your throughput and of your latency. We'll do some comparisons later with some other blockchain initiatives, but if we could just get an idea roughly of the kind of numbers we're talking about.
Yeah, so we mentioned about 10 million transactions per second. Obviously, it's not what we have today or even like in a few months. What is crucial is, can there be architecture that will allow us to keep improving towards it, to achieve what we really need, whether in 3 years or 5 years, to be the architecture, right? Doesn't matter whether Ethereum is going there or any other blockchain project is going there, the architecture matters far more, especially when you start today, right? You don't need to start anything. Ethereum will improve 10% over months, if not even bigger jump. But to do a 100x jump, or even if not even 1000x jump, it really requires a new way of thinking. If not a new team, a new smaller group to really brainstorm, a smaller collaborator, if not a new approach to this problem.
Yes, I think what Stephen's touching on there is that you can Bitcoin and Ethereum, they've been making proposals to improve their throughput for the last several years, and it takes a while to roll out something like SegWit, and that has a marginal improvement, right? So you can get better that way, but given that you're starting at a baseline of, let's say, 4 or 10 transactions per second, those incremental improvements won't add up to the scale that we're trying to achieve. So we have to start over from the very basics. And I think what Stephen's hinting at here with the architecture, the new architecture is sharding. And sharding is something that enables you theoretically to grow your throughput linearly with the number of nodes in the network. And so that in that way, it can be limitless. But today, we're not there yet, because in order to scale to, let's say, 10 million transactions per second, we need many, many, many participants. We need a really, truly global network. In terms of numbers today, our most recent testnet in September was 118,000 transactions per second.
Wow. Okay. So the research I've been doing has been based on your OmniLedger technology, which we'll discuss. My understanding was at that point that we were talking about numbers something like 13,000. Clearly, that's not the case. And to hear those kind of numbers, that's really significant. We are only, having interviewed quite a lot of different companies as well, Nick, that is of the highest level right now. That kind of benchmark of just over the 100K. That really is the kind of pushing the barriers of what blockchain can do. Are you confident that you are leading the way with regard to the TPS?
Absolutely. So it is the first thing we want to show the community. There are many, many things we need to do, right? First of all is to update our white paper, because you're reading a very old version of it.
I am, yes.
Suffice to say, we learned quite far more, right? It was just just very few of us at that time. Right now, it's about 12 of us. What we have done with the community update every month, we haven't really sent you a newsletter to give you a sense of like how far we're progressing, both in terms of research, but also how far we push our benchmark to be. First thing you would notice is we are very serious about how many number of nodes in our network. Only Ethereum and Bitcoin is managed to really host 50,000 and 100,000 nodes, and that's where we're at. The benchmark that Nick just mentioned, we used 44,000 machines. Most other projects say, hey, why don't I test out with 1,000, couple hundreds, if not even design for 21, right? We are very serious being in the league of what Bitcoin and Ethereum started out with. Right.
Okay. So let's talk about that in conjunction with enterprise, gentlemen, because we often hear the narrative of circumventing authority, really being that anonymous. Sometimes that's a misnomer, because that isn't always the agenda of the initial blockchains that started, such as BTC and ETH. But let's now talk about your agenda with regard to how you're going to meld the enterprise world with the public blockchain philosophy. Are you planning on doing that?
I think the idea of whether it's an enterprise blockchain or it's a consumer blockchain or it's like permission-based is a bit misguided.
Right.
We really think that there's no private versus public cloud software these days. There's no internet versus intranet these days, because it is going to be one software, but how you use it. Think about Slack, if not even Zoom, right? We started off with Slack for everyone. It's free, freemium, and then you customize for whatever features that you need for enterprise. Because the idea of another documents, another storage, even another cloud for just enterprise doesn't make sense. It does make sense though, for blockchain to work with big companies so that day one you have like 1 million, if not even 10 million users to be deployed. So the idea is the technology must not be separated into like, hey, it worked for 20 nodes, and then a few years later, let's make it work for 200, if not like 20,000. Right? So the software should not have that separation of intranet anymore.
Right.
At the same time, the users must be able to work with bigger product with lots of users.
Well, Nick, can you talk us through this then? Explain to us, perhaps it's also outlined in your white paper, the differences between those permission systems such as R3, Quorum, Hyperledger, etc., with their Sawtooth, Lake, and different iterations they've built. Talk us through, what you stand for in comparison to that, permission design, and also those other public blockchains such as Chainspace, Algorand, because you do mention them as well.
So I can't really speak too much about some of the permission blockchains because I haven't read deeply about them. But I really resonate with what Stephen's talking about of, kind of to bring real value. I don't think it makes sense to create your own walled garden. To me, in many cases, the permissioned blockchain is sort of defeats the purpose. You want this open consensus, not closed consensus. And just to sort of build on just the enterprise piece a little bit more, before I think Stephen can elaborate on Algorand and Chainspace, is that I think people kind of draw another boundary between the blockchain world and then the traditional technology world or the internet, right? And I think that's a real mistake. And I think, when people look at DAppRadar and they say like, oh, there's no usage, there's hardly anyone using these decentralized applications. I think even the term decentralized applications is misleading, because I think in many ways you can take existing applications, existing user ecosystems, and then interweave some sort of blockchain functionality into it to enhance the user experience or the value that's provided to customers. And I think that's also where you need scale, because if you already have a large user ecosystem with millions of users, you're not going to be able to onboard anything meaningful on a platform like Ethereum. You need something that's scalable from day one. And that's where Harmony comes in.
Yeah. Your question about like all these particular consortium projects are very good. I think it becomes already very clear. Like when we started, like very early this year, everyone's still talking about like Hyperledger, if not chain. We also have friends still have VMware, like building like chains for the customers, Quorum and what's not. I think it's a great project, like to be able to do that level of consulting, helping a few big enterprise to work with each other. But the best example is really Slack and Google Docs. There's no more like just private cloud or like intranet like communication tool necessary. Because if you figure out how to do one messaging, now in this case one blockchain that anyone can use, you only need to customize for your in-house use, if not a few more parameters, right? And that's why it's so hard to figure out a product that works for everyone first. And that's what is so powerful.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the key aspects of your technology. Obviously, sharding is really important. If you guys could explain to us a little bit more about that with regard to OmniLedger specifically, why it's a key protocol and why it functions as an engine for your whole system.
Absolutely. So the idea of, they call it the Elastical, and then OmniLedger, and now actually called Rapid Chain, and what Harmony extending and building on top of this foundation. Obviously, there are lots of previous work in this area, and we are very serious about bringing the best research into production system. Is the key idea of sharding. The idea of sharding comes from really distributed database and distributed backend system that said, how can I actually linearly scale? In blockchain, it's a simple idea. In the database system, people take like 20 years, 30 years to figure it out already. What is being difficult is, can we do it over open internet? Instead of like a database, 20, if not even 50 of them talking to each other, if one doesn't work, you shut down and bring another one up. In the internet, if you just do sharding, everyone attacks you. So instead of like, if you're having like 50,000 nodes and you can't really attack it, right? You need to buy so many of the nodes and having that level of hash power. By the time you only have like 200 or 500 nodes of a much smaller shard, what it means is, let's say we really want the network to be 100,000 nodes, right? And now you have 1,000 shard, you only have like 100 to 500 within each shard. And suddenly everyone can just attack one small shard. What is amazing of the recent work is people figure out how to put all the nodes into different shards without you having a choice. The idea of randomness generation is really the key to this problem.
Yeah, I'd like to elaborate there because sharding is a huge topic. I think we could talk the rest of the hour just purely about sharding. So I think just to explain a bit of a background to give some of the listeners a little more of a scope of why sharding is important, is that this concept of vertical scaling versus horizontal scaling. And this is a concept that came around in server systems back when Google was just getting started. At the time, the common knowledge was to do vertical scaling, mean, okay, let's buy a more expensive server, like physical server hardware with, that's faster, has more memory, all these things, and optimize for that so that you can, run a more popular website. And the problem with that is that you run into diminishing returns. As you buy more and more expensive hardware, there's eventually a limit to what you can do with just one machine. Right. And so what Google and others did was think about it in a different way. And they designed their software such that it could be parallelized. And so it could be run on off-the-shelf hardware. And whenever they needed more capacity, they just added more machines. And that's called horizontal scaling. So it's a fundamentally different approach. And that's where sharding comes in. Sharding is the equivalent of that in a blockchain context. So whereas most projects are going for the vertical scaling piece, which is, okay, we have one monolithic network, and we're going to try to make it as fast as possible, this one network. You definitely can make a lot of gains that way, but you run into those same diminishing returns. And so we are taking all the other, sharding as a whole concept is taking the other approach, saying, okay, let's try to step away from this diminishing returns and instead break the network up into smaller components so that as we add more machines to validate, we can have more blockchains and have more throughput. So that's right. the core concept behind sharding.
Right, and Nick, essentially when we talk about that, that's where the language of side chains come in, or child chains. It really depends on which blockchain architecture we're talking about. But there is a bit of a buzzword happening now with horizontal scaling is arguably the essential for moving forward in blockchain. But let's talk about the number of nodes that you currently have now. Let's also talk about the committees as well, what they represent, why they're important. We hear that also juxtaposed with concepts like clusters. So why do these matter, and what's your numbers right now for nodes?
So you're asking two questions. How big our network and how many nodes do we want to support? Right. And question about communities and who are running, let me take the first half. Is we are figuring out the testnet that able to support like literally 50,000 of nodes, right? And it's going to be critical because very few people go back to solve that hard problem. Hey, why don't I take what I learned from school and optimize one or a few, like tens of networks, right? So finally, we are able to showcase with the testnet with like 50,000 machines, and that's going to be what we will be like targeting before we launch our mainnet.
Right.
Yeah, and then I guess you were asking the second piece was about community, how we're going to involve people.
Well, more so the committees. The actual committees that you've designed and embedded as part of the node structure.
Oh, got it. Okay. Well, so there's a few different challenges with sharding. And so the thing is, there's three the reason you run into those diminishing returns is you have limited resources. Each node is finite, right? It's just one machine. Doesn't have infinite storage. It doesn't have infinite computing. It doesn't have infinite bandwidth to communicate with other nodes. And so when you shard, you have to make sure that you are only using a constant amount of each one of these resources for each node.
Right.
And so that's why, for example, Zilliqa, they do transaction validation sharding, but not necessarily state sharding, meaning the storage. Every node still stores the whole state of the network. So we're targeting sharding on all three of these levels because that's the only way to actually be fully scalable. So the committees, having secure committees is one of the big challenges because, as Stephen was describing earlier, when you break your network up then into smaller chunks, it's easier for an attacker to come in and basically try to compromise that one shard and do bad things. And so one of the challenges, the main challenges, is how do you do this securely? And the answer overwhelmingly is to do it randomly. So you need to have what's called a representative shard, meaning that the constituency of the shard represents the committee, represents the overall sort of statistical constituency of the entire network.
Okay.
So let's get 25% malicious nodes in the overall network. Then when we create each shard, it should have also, with high probability, that same proportion of malicious nodes. And that's where randomness comes in, as well as picking the size of the committee, such that the sample size is big enough to reflect that overall statistics of the entire network. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I actually was reading into Algorand's random verifiable function as well. They do something a little bit like that too. So again, we're really moving forward into these new wave of blockchain designs, and obviously the most academic thinking or thought that is out there today. Let's now talk about your languages though, gentlemen, with regard to access. How easy have you made it for developers? What kind of, let's say, developing languages are available for your platform? And are you thinking ahead in terms of enfranchising more people to develop on your network?
Absolutely. Type of language is my favorite topic. I started programming since I was like 10, doing assembly language when I was 12, and I did a PhD just on programming language. So we can talk about this all day. And I do.
Let's try not to.
I do believe you asked the best question. It's not about making it faster only, but actually helping more people understand how to write smart contracts. Imagine back in the day of websites, right? If it's just a faster HTML or faster browser, it doesn't make any impact to the world to build more. Just like mobile apps, much easier to write, much easier to develop. We have the same thoughts. For sure, we need to really give the community right now, whether on Solidity or EVM, Ethereum ecosystem, to easily come to develop on us. And the idea of WebAssembly backend is very well understood that everyone thinks it will be a great common infrastructure. But our thought is much further. I wrote quite in length about what a new language will be useful, both in terms of security, how easy to write, and actually how fast it runs as well. When I say fast, I mean two things, both running it fast, but also developing it fast. In my academic study, we studied something called functional language. I write in OCaml for many years because making what you want to express, they call it declaratively. So that basically you and I talk, do we understand each other? I just declare, say, hey, there's no way that you will get my wallet that we don't really touch overall as a system, that I would make sure that constraint is satisfied. It's something that at the language level, at the tools level, that should be enforced. It touches on the idea of formal verification that we spend lots of time thinking about.
Right. So in that respect, harping back to the languages themselves, how easy have you made this? Because obviously I've read into Rust, looked into Go. I really want to discuss more about the access. How easy have you made this whole architecture for those who want to utilize it?
We are just starting with our backend with Go. Rust is the part that we want to spend like high performance, if not lower level system to be implemented in. So we don't have a full story on what will be something equivalent, let's say, to Zila's language looks like yet. We do know that the backend will be something like WebAssembly. We do know that I have a functional language called Mint that I've been developing and designing for many years. But what will be the developers feels like writing certain language, we very much feeling like, hey, I declared when this condition happens, I will still react to you like this. They call it more like process thinking, right? I react to certain events. But at the same time, globally, I'll be checking some constraint and saying, hey, the total amount of all the wallet together will be only controlled by certain entities, instead of like saying, I need to check this, deduct this, and minus this, and add that in order to be doing step-by-steps. That will be some flavor of what the community can expect.
Right. And once again, WASM or WebAssembly is another buzzword we hear with the top echelon of blockchain discussion right now. We hear it in, for example, Polkadot. I remember reading it in W3C. It's also prevalent in I think it's the Web3 movement that's happening now. So there's a lot of discussions about the imperatives of the WebAssembly itself. But if we could talk a little bit more now on some of the key features as well that you have. One of the terms I've read is the transport network. That includes your unikernel servers. It includes multi-core streaming. So let's talk about some of those key assets, Nick. I know it's tough because we're diving deep into this tech, but really these are your core assets. So let's explore maybe two of them so people can understand what they're all about.
We actually learned so much about like multicast, rapid queue, and all that network stuff. So.
Yeah. So I'll take some of the networking piece, and Stephen is more of the low-level systems guy. And there's a lot to speak about both of these topics. In terms of networking, we've gotten very interested in this concept of erasure coding, and it has lots and lots of different benefits. Not only in the way that you can possibly encode data, that's a little bit more futuristic for sharding, more secure sharding, but also in terms of how you communicate across the network. And one of the nice things about erasure coding is that it enables you to have a lot more resilience for malicious nodes who may be trying to block messages, and also for network anomalies. So you can basically have more strong guarantees that your messages will get through in a certain amount of time, and people can't block you. So you have more liveness and more safety. So one of the main things that we're really excited about with RaptorQ and erasure coding is that it will enable us to actually propagate sync blocks faster within committees. This process we call borrowing from RapidChain IDA, we've now basically improved it and call it adaptive IDA. And IDA stands for Information Dispersal Algorithm. The core idea there is that we realized that in our VFT protocol that a majority of the time was being spent trying to sync the block from the leader to all of the rest of the nodes in the network to vote, to gather their signature. And what IDA, the problem is that it's a bottleneck of the leader having to try to send that block on his own, right? He has limited bandwidth. So he becomes the core bottleneck there. And there's some ideas there about multicast trees and whatnot, but again, you can run into problems where malicious nodes block things and slow things down. What IDA does is it takes that block and performs an erasure code in it, which expands the amount of data, but encodes it in such a way that I can send those packages, little blocks of it around to the network, and each node can then take a subset of those blocks and reconstruct the original message. And this enables me as the leader to just send one chunk to all of the other people in my committee, and then they can themselves gossip it to everyone else.
That's interesting, because basically you're tweaking the PBFT. You're moving beyond your own PBFT to make it even better.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So what this does is it symmetrizes the bandwidth utilization for all the nodes in the committee, and it's more secure, so we can reach consensus much faster that way.
Right. And what about the other aspects as well, Stephen, with regard to
So what you're asking about, like unikernel, like Google based on UDP to do message, is what we are very excited about, being able to optimize the entire stack. So that's like they call it the full stack optimization. Being able to control the clients as well as the server, entire network allows us to do that, right? So I was very into system programming as well, whether it's about kernel modules or even like really getting to remove the kernel. They call it the unikernel approach. Is what they are able to do with zero copy streaming, so that when the package come in, you just like bounce it back right away without even the context switch in the kernel. The idea of using UDP is going to be the key aspect here. Most of the time, you are dealing with large network. Most of the time, you're actually getting, the reason why people worry about malicious nodes is also because there are lots of attacks over the internet that they can just partition your network or just send you a bunch of flooding with like whatever request that you do. Being able to very efficiently do that with UDP is what the concept of sessionless communication, using the quick example that I mentioned. Using the unique kernel, the idea is really, can it be so tiny that Don't worry about the streaming. Even with like many cores, you can be responding very fast to network call. It's what over many years of I've been writing web services. I was working big companies to have like 10 million transactions per second for whether Google Maps or Apple Maps, forces many of the engineering to really take it at the system level. So combined with many of the ideas that we just like learn over the months of how to do really network overlay, whether about erasure coding, there are lots of exciting ideas in the network space.
Right. So obviously the whole premise for integrating this system as well, Stephen, is to bring to the fore a gateway, so to speak, for microtransactions to be universal. So let's talk about for just a moment, now that we've discussed the features, some of the use cases, because people really truly need to understand how we can implement blockchain architectures like yours into the real world so that we can see evidence, empirical evidence that things can be done on the blockchain that makes sense, even though perhaps when we don't know that the blockchain is running underneath it.
You're asking like what are the particular application that would be?
Yeah, if you could give us some examples now of the use cases, for example, of how people in the community, you know, that aren't blockchain savvy are going to be able to interact with this kind of technology. What's the key, the functional benefit for them? Proof that it can, I guess, integrate into current systems, as Nick was saying. It's not necessarily a new way. Blockchain already exists in many different industries right now. So how can we now see Harmony integrate with these new technologies that you're building into, you know?
Yeah, so it is the question, right? What is high performance blockchain good for, right?
Right.
I think the answer comes in like what is usable now, like this month, what is usable this year, what is usable in a few years, right?
Right.
What is usable, people really understand. Financial application are the best disruption to both like decentralization, the idea of decentralization to like larger organization controlling, whether about doing exchanges, whether about the escrow and all the derivatives coming on this platform. We do understand that it's not just going to be about the game assets that you trade, probably it's just going to be hundreds of them, but the game mechanics. So not only the fact that I play for hours and I earn this Pokemon and I trade to you, right? I want the entire games to be transparent to everyone. So that when I play, it's not that I keep mining and then suddenly, hey, I win or I don't win today, or someone cheated and I didn't even know. So people want to put the game mechanics onto the blockchain as well, and that requires far more computation and the transactions. Maybe Nick can mention.
Well, Stephen, I need to jump in for a moment. I think that was a really good plug for one of your partners because one of your partners, my understanding, is called Enamoka. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that correctly. But Nick, if you want to elaborate on that, I think it was a good plug on Stephen's behalf, that's for sure.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So Animoca Brands, I met Yatsu, the founder, when I was in Hong Kong in my previous life in AI. And basically, I was having a call with him, catching up, and I knew that he had been involved in CryptoKitties and he was in the blockchain space. And he had also heard about Harmony and he was keen to work with us because now he's trying to be one of the progressive, thought leaders, if not industry leaders in blockchain gaming. So he wanted to partner with us because he saw Harmony as a potential platform to be scalable enough for use in blockchain gaming. So one of the games that they're working on now is owned by a game studio called Pixel, and it's Sandbox. It's similar to Minecraft, and their whole idea is that they want to create a user-generated content ecosystem where the users actually own the in-game items and create and build them, and then can sell them or trade them.
So we hear about this with the NFTs. This is exactly what is afforded by them to make this possible in the gaming sort of component of blockchain design. So clearly, the real value for you and the real asset is this ability to be universally scalable for an NFT.
That's definitely one of them, I think. And then in the future, so these are sort of the in-game assets, right? Which will be very crucial. But in the future also, what Stephen was touching on was the game mechanics, on-chain game mechanics, meaning that everything is verified, everything that's been laid out as these are the rules of the game are followed, and I can go to the blockchain to check that no one was cheating. So that's something that will require even more throughput in the future. If you imagine, let's say, what's that game called? There's a really popular game, I can't remember what it's called. I don't game anymore.
Any casino games you can mention. Even Minecraft, sorry, the Warcraft especially.
Warcraft.
Yeah.
The new one where you parachute in and you have...
I'm sorry, I'm not a gamer, so I don't know, but I understand, the list is infinite, really.
But to take it a step further to the long-term vision of the applications that we foresee in Harmony being the most valuable, touches on AI data marketplaces. So I previously at Stanford studied AI.
Yes.
Alok, one of our co-founders, he was actually working at Apple on Siri. Many of us have a data science or AI passion/background. And so for us, one of the things that we've seen in the existing AI industry is this concept of sort of these digital data moats, these sort of data ecosystems where the people who have the data don't want to share, and it gives them certain advantages, and it also blocks developers from building on top of it, and so it kind of limits the amount of value that you can extract from that data. And one of our collaborators, Hakwan Lau and his wife Kayet Liu, they have told us about how you can consider data as a non-rival asset. A non-rival asset is one in which sharing it actually doesn't decrease the value. So for example, like let's compare that to like a commodity like oil. If I share oil with you, obviously it's a zero-sum game, right?
Right.
There's a limited amount of oil, we can't really share it because
finite amount. Right.
Yeah, that's the nature of it. But a non-rival asset is one where sharing it actually does not decrease its value. And in fact, bringing more data together makes the value even greater. And so, we think of, Google and Facebook as extremely valuable companies these days because they have that data. And basically what Harmony enables is a more open data infrastructure.
Right.
So that in the future, when people have more ownership of their data, there's more of this open ecosystem. There can be more data sharing, there can be more data aggregation, and there can be more innovation on that data for people to build models or what have you. And by having it open, it'll be even more valuable, way more valuable than any of these current players are.
Right. Well, Nick, let's talk about the narrative of interoperability, because that's what I'm hearing from you almost, in the sense of the ecosystem you're building. But let's take it even further. Are you planning on building your own interoperability beyond itself, whereby potentially you could interconnect with other blockchains?
Well, that's a very hard problem. I think even interoperating like Bitcoin to Ethereum is already $1 billion blockchain idea. So yeah, I do think that it's actually what the ecosystem is waiting for. Many people that are doing trading, many people are doing asset management, requires all that. We do have ideas what it means to have like on-chain order book, cross-chain transactions possible, but I don't think we have a full story to tell there yet.
Right. Okay. So right now you're just solely and wholly focused on really building out your own network. If we could talk a little bit more, I suppose, now on your code. I wanted to find out how open source you are with regard to access right now, and what can developers expect?
Yeah. So we are just in the middle of doing it. We are doing testnet and hope to open up more and more part of it. So the entire source code of the compiler, the language that we're developing, is on our GitHub. Mm-hmm. We have been very focused on solving the hardest, lowest level component first. We call it, so we are Harmony. We call our library libunison. We do think that there are a big part of it, very much like Filecoin and IPFS having the lib P2P. We do think that the underlying, whether P2P layer or network layer, or the entire idea of open internet overlay so that you can do transaction and all this data processing, is going to be very valuable to general developers, not just blockchain developers or Harmony developers. So we're starting from there. Mm-hmm. It will really create a strong brand for us to attract far more developers into the space, hopefully hooking them into like blockchain in general, Harmony particular. So we started that just last month, just two weeks ago. I announced it in our newsletter. So doing more of that, building on top of it, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And also actually
go ahead, Nick.
Another open source library for RaptorQ, because RaptorQ erasure coding hasn't had any open source implementations yet. And our networking guru, Eugene, who worked for 15 years at NTT and did 3 years at Amazon, he is a very passionate open source contributor to Linux and FreeBSD. And so he is really excited to bring RaptorQ, not just to the blockchain community, but to the wider open source community.
Well, Nick, I want to talk to you about how you are planning on developing or establishing hubs, perhaps, where it's just really focused on developing those developers, really building the skill sets out in franchising more of the ecosystem growth that you obviously need as part of this mass adoption strategy. What are you going to do as a team to build this out in different regions of the world?
Well, I think, there's a lot to be said for just community outreach in the form of hackathons, in the form of developer bounties and incentivization for people. I think there's also a lot to be said for building a network that is that much more useful, that people come to you. Your product is so good that they come to you. The other piece that I want to emphasize is also that one of the advantages of targeting more enterprise users or enterprise kind of companies as partners is that it's more like signing a contract rather than trying to build an ecosystem of developers. That said, I think one of the key things for attracting developers is not necessarily, you look at EOS and some of these companies with a lot of money to throw at the problem. I don't think throwing money at the problem is necessarily the right approach. There's also, if you look at Ethereum, they've built out so many other subcomponents that make your life so much easier as a developer, whether that's MetaMask or Truffle or what's the one that the database one? I'm trying to remember. Anyway,
the Infura.
Infura, yeah. So building out the sort of auxiliary services that developers will need is going to be just as crucial.
Yeah,
right.
That's on the developer side, right? Development side. I don't know whether you're also asking about like just the general community, like what the application people, which industry people will be caring about it, right? First of all, we started with like lots of investors all over the world. We are entire team is Silicon Valley based. Many of us from here, many years in Silicon Valley, but we actually end up having investors all over the world. Because day one, we spent a long trip in China, really understanding, wow, they were one of the earliest ones adopting Bitcoin and Ethereum. We took the entire team, 10 of us, to China for 2 weeks, understanding the community there, both in terms of developer, the retail investors, as well as people that are eager to adopt blockchain technology.
So in that respect, I just want to interject for a moment and really get this clear, because we'll move into the token discussion now. Your strategic investors were global. Were they also from the traditional sector as well, not just that crypto VC sphere that we see that, from the 2017 narrative? That was quite commonplace.
We only did our seed round. We are opening up the next round. So we definitely, like Nick is actually visiting in Hong Kong next week to talk to some family offices. We do see lots of interest from traditional funds or family offices. So far, most of them are crypto fund and some of the friends and people we know in the industry. But your point about like really opening up to many more investors so that many people are sticked in it. At the end of the day, it's the idea of decentralization that will make sure this network will be meaningful over years.
All right. And I think that's also really important for the listener who's understanding the utility, who is looking at it as that sort of almost pseudo security, which I know you're not, but people do look at it as an investment initially, from a very functional perspective. So distribution, fundamental to really disperse the token itself, so that obviously there's not a monopoly. As we've seen with other examples in the past. I mean, to be fair, even if we discuss Bitcoin for one moment, we have seen right now with the hash wars, what can happen when small numbers of people can have huge stakes. So are you saying that you're trying to really remove that problem?
That's something that we talk about almost every day.
I think one of the key metrics for success for us is having a globally distributed and decentralized community and ownership. Because that's really what gives the blockchain its security and its resilience. And at the end of the day, we are building really amazing tech here, but that's only half of the picture. The other half is the community. And we care deeply about providing and including them so that they have ownership. They feel that they're a part of this, and they will have a major impact in the Harmony story. In the end, at the end of the day, hopefully we can take a step back and disappear, and Harmony itself keeps going on because of the strength of the community. Right.
Well, let's now talk about the token. I really need to get into the tokenomics, as they call it. Gentlemen, right now, is it correct in saying you're at the private sale stage?
At the what stage?
The private sale. Are you currently in a stage?
Yes, we are open to our round. We have been planning to finish our round so that we'll be listed hopefully early next year. So we are very open to really talking to investors. In particular, the new idea that they call it mining 2.0, that's going to be very critical for us. It's very critical, of course, to be like building towards having the mainnet and launching with the right partners and so on. We're finishing our private run. We still have like a hard cap to fill. But the critical piece is, can we bring partners that will help us run the node and really spread, not just later on like, hey, this is marketing, everyone buy these coins, but actually helping us to secure them.
Right. So let's talk about that in detail. Are you specifically looking for that reciprocal arrangement where they really have to prove their worth beyond the capital?
Yeah. So Nick can mention more about it. We call it the strategic investors.
Yeah. So we're opening a strategic initiative where we want to bring in investors who are aligned with us and our vision of creating this decentralized network. So it's no longer valuable, to just inject capital. You need to also not only, you need to provide actually the resources that the network needs to succeed. And one of the side effects of this is that all of a sudden, all the investors who, were in it for the wrong reasons are no longer really interested. Because it sounds like too much work to them to have to actually participate and run a node. So you end up targeting only those investors that really care and really are aligned with the long-term vision. And so that's why we're going with this path.
And if you think of why it's so critical, is at the end of the day is really the strength of the network that are run by different nodes that is going to bring the value as well as helping to secure the network, right? You don't want the entity, even just the few of us, the core developers, to be running or deciding what to run on those nodes and those networks.
I see.
So we want day one, right now, even before testnet, like ready mainnet to be launched next year, that lots of people know what we're doing, know how to run a node for us. It's not about how much, right? Running a cloud machine is very cheap these days. It's really about having stake in the game, knowing how to operate, and adding the value as part of the network, in long term.
Right. Well, let's talk now about the access for the public. Now, we've seen a lot of controversy specifically within crypto in the last few months, particularly in the last week, with regard to crackdowns from the SEC. Are you planning on any kind of ICO at all with regard to the final phase of the public offering?
We do think that ICO is absolutely necessary. The question is legally where and how. I think we can announce the partner we just signed. I think so, right? We signed the deal already. Conlist is our partner.
Okay.
Fantastic partner to be working with. So to answer your question, absolutely ICO. We don't know when. We don't know when is the market sentiment good to do it. But we're already starting to really enlist our best partners. Conlist easily have done it for Filecoin and other really great projects. It really helps spread out many of the people. We work with other people. We can mention about Republic as well that works specifically just for US. And we set up our foundation as well outside US so that we can actually issue securities. Our token now is security. There's no doubt about it. We're not getting around. We did all the hard work, all the boring legal work to make it happen.
So just to clarify that, so are you saying that right from the outset you'll be classified as a security?
Yes.
So the truth about this, Brad, is that basically any token that you sell now, until you have an up and running network, is going to be classified as a security. Yeah. So in the long run, we will be a utility token. But for the near term, basically, no matter what you do, even if you try to claim your utility token, it's pointless.
Nick, I'm so glad you said that, because I have literally been saying that to myself for so long, and many others in the space as well. When an ICO first releases, it is not an ICO. It is literally functioning as something else, and that is, by default, a security. So what you're saying is that the core functionality or the core fabric of your whole ecosystem is utility, but you're making sure that you're compliant with the systems that be, the powers that be, and that's the SEC.
And we spent so many months. We can't even talk about most of the actions behind in the newsletter, because these are all very legal and very much.
Sure, but I'm really glad that I'm hearing.
We spend lots of time just on that to make sure that over long term, we don't want to just like risk it and see what happens.
Right.
We have to do all the hard work to make sure that later on the security is going to be like tradable. We want to make sure that we're using the best platform like Economies. We're working with the best legal counsel, Finwick, to make sure that this is a great project, not just like, hey, let's see what happens.
I see. So clearly you're ultra compliant. You're making sure that your whole team is onto it, and I appreciate that. Let's now talk about the raise itself. Let's get into the numbers. How much are you raising? Why are you raising that? And you know, what's your objective with those funds?
Yeah. Well, you call us in a good week, so we are just getting started. We understand the market is going crazy. We are not in a hurry, but to make sure that we understand what the investors are looking for now. We are also looking for very specific things, as we said about this is more like a strategy initiatives. So we really are listening and really testing the water or understanding, hey, we have going very strong has time to development, but what can investors bring in this time? So our round is a little bit unspecified at this point about like when and what are the amounts. Our hard cap still have 12 millions to fill.
Okay.
So, and we are definitely launching the mainnet like Q2 next year. So in between now and then, we want to make sure that we understand what the market is telling us. At the same time, we do believe that all over the world, there's still lots of exciting partners to sign.
So 12 mil hard cap, Q2 next year, mainnet release. So, you know, we're moving quite fast. How can we ensure, Nick, that the team is also going to have a very secure locked tokens so that they're not going to be able to access them early? How can we trust all of this system?
Very well asked. So to clarify, the total hard cap is 30. We raised 18 like 7 months ago. So to answer your question about lockup is really where the game have changed quite a bit of like how people think about lockup and liquidity.
Right.
First of all, to answer the question is what the team has is 12% of all the token. Very tiny amount. With this team, we are all very believe in the vision. We lock ourselves for 4 years. Many long-term commitment to the project, and we want to make sure that the foundation also owns some part of it. That is really something that over long time, there will be research, there will be the development that will bring back the value to the network. So the rest of it that we are talking to investors is coming here now. The liquidity of what happened a few months ago is quite different now. We really need people to understand that, hey, the market is not going to be a quick flip anymore, but what we can do. So with investors, we're still negotiating out the liquidity of the new terms, but probably will be much, much longer than what people used to.
I see. Okay, let's talk about exchanges for a moment. I noticed that that's also part of your roadmap, Nick. What's the plan, you know, as you project into the next year coming? Obviously, lots happening. Do you plan to be on exchanges at some point next year?
Yes, we certainly plan to. It's still a bit tricky because in many ways we have to be very careful about where our tokens are listed. So it's a little bit, we're still kind of, you know, navigating those waters. So I don't have any more to comment.
Yeah, sure. That we have been talking to different exchange already. We can't really disclose it, but we understand that. I think, especially these days, being the good project coming in to bring in the values and the users is, I think, it's going to be very mutually helpful to understand. I think what is critical for like the audience is understanding Harmony is very serious about not just like technically executing it, but making sure that the entire ecosystem of whether the security being useful with the right lockup, and being on the exchange, we definitely looking for the community to help with us to understand what the good timeline and so on. But at the same time, we're doing all the preparation work.
Right. Perfect segue as well. So Steve, well done on that, because I want to talk to you about your mass adoption strategies with regard to marketing, with regard to not just your crypto, but outside of crypto. Obviously, there's an imperative there right now more than ever, given the relatively small size of the crypto community globally. So what are you doing to really showcase what you're doing in this space so that people can be not only informed, but can really act on that information?
Yeah, well, I think this is what this generation of blockchain project must do. Like taking the mindset and thinking about new marketing strategy, really bring the blockchain technology so that people don't know this is called blockchain, but they will use it. We know there are many great applications to do that. Right. I already told you lots of story about how the language itself, how the tooling itself needs to solve the problem, so that more application can be written. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're already seeing that evidenced in the poor performance we're seeing of companies such as Facebook. To be fair, Cambridge Analytica really blew the lid off some of these issues of centralized data control and access. So you are right. There's a lot of people, especially the new generation of, I guess, techno-savvy people. We are aware that things do need to change with regard to our control, our autonomy over our own data.
Yeah. Nick can tell you more. We are running out
We're running low on battery here.
Yes, sure. Go for it.
But I'll elaborate for a second. So I think obviously privacy is a big concern, and that actually kind of feeds into the AI data marketplace I was speaking about earlier. And essentially the idea is that if you can have ownership of your own data, then you don't have these large corporations selling it or spying on you. So I think that's one of the major things. People who are really privacy oriented may want to actually change to adopt new blockchain-powered dApps. But I also think another industry that will drive major adoption is gaming, and that's also part of why we were so excited to work with Animoca. Because if you think about gaming, it's always been sort of a tech-forward kind of community, where gamers are the first ones to really start using the internet to play together. Gamers are the ones who pioneered graphics cards and all these new kind of hardwares. And if you think about gaming in a blockchain context, gamers already are familiar with digital currencies and the concept of digital ownership of assets. And so in many ways, gamers are the ones who, and they're also kind of the demographic of gamers is sort of younger, and the type of people who are kind of already more aligned with the blockchain and cryptocurrency kind of thinking. So we think that's a really good demographic, and also a very native ecosystem, games itself, to leverage blockchain technology. Because earlier.
So in that sense, Nick, you're also aligning with those industries you think are going to flourish first. So that will inadvertently affect the growth, have positive implications for the growth of your own ecosystem as the base layer platform. But let's now talk about the other part. And that is that paradox of the influencer, of the content creator, of the marketer in crypto. It's quite anomalous because we see almost an unusual correlation between the impact of those people in crypto right now, because we're pre-utility.
So you're saying that
what's the strategy with regard to yourselves in terms of how you're going to approach marketing?
Yeah, you mentioned about some of our with our partner, how we think about. I strongly think that influencer have a play, but the question is the strategy.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I really admire about you, Brad, is that you are so deeply aligned with the long-term use and impact of blockchain technology, and you're one of the most honest and unbiased influencers. And that's why
what a good project interview with you for very good reason.
That's why we're very excited to speak with you, because we knew it wasn't going to be some sort of shilling or all this kind of stuff that hopefully will kind of move on from after the whole wave of hype of last year. And so I think for us, that's really important to only engage with the kinds of influencers who are like you, who really care about the technology at a fundamental level, that are deeply aligned with our vision of generating harmony, more equality, more transparency, bringing this into the world, and not bringing rampant speculation, if not even abuse of retail investors.
Right, and I really appreciate that, Nick, here coming from you, because it's not easy, to be fair, to all those other people out there who are also trying to commit to the long-term game of blockchain in the sense of education, because there's so much bullshit. There is no other way to say it. In this space, there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of selling out to the short-term game for many different parties. So in that respect, I really wanted to ask you, now that I know your philosophy is so transparently about trying to present the long-term use case of Harmony, are you also going to build out into mainstream media sources as well? Because that's the big play, is really how do you stretch the crypto sphere, by the strategy of bringing more people in.
We definitely need some just being able to reach out the mainstream people as well. I think there are two approaches to this, right? Are you getting interviewed by New York Times and CNBC? That's a great question. We are building up some momentum towards that. But at the same time, can then be a product people talk about, and this is it, right? Everyone uses it. It turns out to be like built by blockchain and using Harmony technology. It's also that angle too. I think both in job marketing, there will be a time that, hey, even my mom and my parents and everyone that don't understand how it works, but they will believe in that vision, right?
Sure.
That's why we're very serious about articulating a vision that doesn't use the word blockchain.
So it sounds like there's a lot more to come with regard to the strategies that you bring forward, and we'll be looking forward to seeing that unfold. But if we could talk also, as you move forward into 2019, a lot is happening technologically. But fundamentally, what is it that you would like to see come of Harmony? Let's say in a decade's time. What's the vision overall that you want to see?
Wow, decade time.
Well, I think, bringing it full circle, our mission statement, open consensus for 10 billion, is what we want to see. I don't think necessarily, there won't be 10 billion people on the planet, we hope, in 10 years. But hopefully in 10 years, we're on the trajectory to get there, to becoming the backbone for the decentralized economy on a global scale. So I would love to see Harmony having hundreds of thousands, if not millions of nodes all around the world, all powering different decentralized applications that are bringing real value to people. And I think that value could even be, let's say in more developing nations, decentralized financial applications really unlocking new economic opportunities, or providing, safe store of value mechanisms. Or it could be something as simple as, what we're talking about with gaming. I think also in 10 years is when we're going to start to see potentially the beginning of the unwinding of some of these data monopolies of these massive companies like Google and Facebook, and the emergence of a new open infrastructure start to take hold.
Yeah, it comes back to why we named the project Harmony. We do believe that everyone in the world can be singing different tones and doing different things. You put it into different groups and it comes out as beautiful music. If we agree that we are singing together, this is not just my data, your data, who owns it. It's really about what we can bring together.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, it's been really enlightening to learn for the first time about everything that Harmony stands for. Hopefully it's not the last time. I really would like to have continued discussions as you develop and as you move into your mainnet next year. Nick White, thank you very much for your contribution. All of the engineering knowledge that you have has really been utilized, I think, very well, and you've demonstrated a great deal of the assets that Harmony brings to not just, as you said, blockchain, but really this new distributed conceptualization of business and technology. Thank you also, Stephen, for your very, very, well evidenced background of engineering and also applications in a multiple array of industries that we've seen come to the fore. You're leading this together in something that is arguably one of the most scalable technologies in this field, and you're clearly confident that you're one of the main players as you move forward for next year. So it's going to be exciting to see this all play out. But no doubt, there's a lot going to happen next year in the whole space.
Absolutely.
Really looking forward to seeing what happens.
Absolutely.
No, thank you, Brad. Asking the great question, telling the world what we really believe in is we really appreciate.
Not a problem, guys. I mean, keep working hard, and people always come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad. And we look forward to having another conversation, perhaps in a year's time, with more updates about where Harmony is.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Awesome.
Nick. And it won't be a year, I can make sure of that. But thank you, guys, and we'll talk really soon. See you guys.
Thank you again.
Okay. All right, Brad.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.